About 10 years ago, Microsoft announced Windows 10. It was to be their final operating system. And in some respects, that assertion is truer than they could have realized. Windows 11 is unique among bad versions of Windows. There have been bad versions of Windows in the past, but they all tended to have usability issues in common. I think the most notable example is Windows 8 because of its revolutionary and controversial user interface, but other versions include Windows ME and Windows Vista, which both were plagued with serious performance issues. Obviously, nothing is more frustrating than using your computer, trying to use your computer, and it crashing on you for no clear reason, or for the specs of the operating system to be raised so much that a computer you spent a lot of money on is no longer as fast as it used to be. Those are incredibly aggravating. Second to that, I say would be user interface choices that confuse people. I really don't like it when Microsoft decides to up and change a big part of their interface for no reason, especially because elderly people don't tend to know how to intuitively use systems like this. I can't tell you how many times I've had to go over to an elderly person's house to teach them how to get into their email when they buy a new computer. And even though I'm not, despite the Mac, not really an Apple fan, I've been a Microsoft fan for a long time. I will give Apple some credit for that. Mac user interface doesn't tend to change very much. However, Windows 11 is different because Windows 11 is, in some respects, more performant than Windows 10. It has user interface changes, but none that are as egregious as Windows 8. With that said, people are jumping ship from Windows 10 to other alternative operating systems, I would say faster than any other time in history. I can't tell you how many times people have come up to me who know very little about computers, who have decided that they want to jump ship to Linux just because they don't want to run Windows 11. In fact, I'll tell you, as a professional operating system engineer, my job is to custom design typically Debian-based Linux distributions for businesses so that they don't have to run Windows or be tied to Microsoft. So what is the reason for people abandoning Windows 11 as fast as they possibly can? Well, I'd say that the spiritual problem at play is that Windows 11 is the first version of Windows that doesn't want to be Windows. And that ethos sort of plays into every other aspect of the operating system. There aren't very many new features aside from essentially shortcuts to online services Microsoft is trying to sell you on. They want Windows to be a gateway to other products that you're really spending money on, when in the past Windows was an end into itself. I think the launch of Windows 95 definitely encapsulated that the most. Now, what is this video for? I would like to say that this video is something of an obituary for Windows. Because unlike the other systems that I've done videos on that I feel very nostalgic about, even Windows Phone, Windows as a system has been a part of my life as long as I can remember. I can't find the photograph of it, but I was using a desktop computer running Windows 98 at like 4 years old. I think the first time I ever installed a program from a CD that I got at the library, I was maybe 5. I was immediately enamored by Windows, and it's been a part of my life. No matter how many times perhaps I've tried to get rid of it, it's just been a perennial part of my life. And I feel the same is true for a lot of other people. You go to places like Pinterest and you look up aesthetic boards and you'll see Windows, out of all things, plastered all over the place. The Windows 9X aesthetic is such a big part of the Vaporwave aesthetic. I can't even imagine what it would be like without it. So Windows has clearly had an incredibly strong presence in at least my generation, even if you're not very technical, especially if you're not very technical. The aesthetic has made a very lasting sort of imprint on our souls. I think a key component as to why Microsoft wanted to make Windows very fun, especially in the pre-internet days, is that they were competing with Apple for not just the business market, but for schools and for home. And a lot of people didn't have internet or very fast internet. And a lot of people, the software back in the day cost a lot of money. I mean, if you wanted to buy a copy of really anything, any decent software, you'd be spending from $100 to $150. And so they wanted even low spec machines and families with not a lot of money to enjoy using their computer. They wanted the computer to be an experience, to feel like a portal into some sort of multimedia magic wonderland. And for the most part, I think they did a really good job with that. And if you don't remember, you're going to. And so what are we going to do today? Well, I'm going to walk you through different versions of Windows in virtual machines. We're going to click around, we're going to have some fun, and we're going to talk about them. So if you don't mind, come along with me, and we're going to dive into what made Windows different. Now, something I'd like to say real quick is that I'm not necessarily going in chronological order of how I discovered Windows. I'm just going in the chronological order of different major versions of Windows to have been released, where I believe that big changes in the system occurred, so that you can kind of see how the development of Windows changed. However, I will give you a little bit of narrative as to what these systems mean to me. For example, Windows 3.1 was never really a big part of my life until I think I was 15 or 16. I really got to explore it within DOSBox, because it's very weird how much it is like Windows 95 and yet how different it is. Microsoft is very clearly trying to avoid a lot of copyright that Apple owned at the time, and so techniques that would have made Windows easier to deal with didn't exist at the time. However, with that said, I really do like how holistic the system is. Every widget and element in the system, and there aren't very many of them, is used right here in the interface. You're given a folder to work with a very spatial design, and that's essentially how every program is built as well. For example, let's take a look at this file manager. I'm going to make it full screen here. You've got this window inside of window thing going on. It was very novel, and frankly enough, I think it was a bad idea given the very restricted resolutions of monitors at that time. With that said, regardless, it was fascinating how they were figuring out how to build operating systems. An annoying thing for me about spatial systems like this, however, is that when you take the window and you downsize it, now all of the icons disappear, and you literally have to scroll to find where they are again. Now there are options up here you can use to rearrange the icons within your window so that they appear without scrolling. It's still kind of obnoxious. Also, the 3-button system that you got in Windows 95, where you have the downsize, maximize, minimize, doesn't exist here. We have this little menu over here with lots of options. Alt F4 was how you closed Windows back then. The idea, I believe, was that this was more for systems that, like Macintosh, didn't really run multiple programs at the same time. This is really designed to be a single tasking system that happened to also support multitasking, just in case you needed it. With that said, I am still very fond of the interface. I love the mouse cursor has stayed the same throughout versions of Windows. I love the different color options you have. Like, let's go to color real quick. Take a look at some of these schemes. They're very, very pretty. We've got, I think I'm going to go to designer real quick. They're very 90s, I will say that. Profoundly 90s this is. I don't have sound drivers installed in this, unfortunately. But if you're interested in playing around with Windows 3.1 just to kind of see how it works, I highly recommend, there's this one guide, I think it's by How To Geek, on how to set up Windows 3.1 in DOSBox with Sound Blaster drivers and with graphics drivers. I highly recommend playing with it just to give you an appreciation for what has changed in Windows. Before I leave, I'm going to show you Write. Yes, this was their version of Mac Write. And honestly, it's pretty nice. It's got true type support. This is an example. Hi. It's a little bit less than WordPad, a little bit more than Notepad. You can do lots of things, like I'm going to go here and embolden this. Nice. Let's see what fonts we have. You notice a lot of these look very familiar. They've been mainstays in Windows for a long time. If I remember correctly, Microsoft wanted at least one version of every font that came default on a Macintosh. And it was a bit of a controversy, actually. Arial is intentionally designed to be a Helvetica knockoff. Times New Roman was intentionally designed to be a slightly different version of Times. And they could get away with a lot of this because the font code itself is able to be copyrighted, but fonts in principle are not able to be copyrighted. All you can copyright is the title. And so a lot of these are actually reverse engineered versions of Apple fonts, where they'd sit there with the Apple font and they would, try to recreate it using their own code. But you know what? I bet very few of you, some of you, very few of you have any kind of nostalgia for Windows 3.1. Also, Microsoft Bob doesn't work, I'm sorry. I would have showed you that if it did. I'm sure that you have a lot more nostalgia for later versions. So after I draw this ugly looking smiley face with my mouse, we're going to get right to it. Yay. Alright, so I'm skipping directly to Windows 98. Part of the reason for this is because I never really had personal experience with Windows 95 in any capacity, and it's incredibly difficult to figure out how to set up because it was released at a time when CDs weren't bootable. You had to have a boot floppy in order to get this thing to work, and I kept trying for a while. I have a Windows 95 ISO. It wasn't quite working. With that said, I got Windows 98 to work, and it's similar enough that we'll be able to cover a lot of the sort of, Windows 95 things. Now, this is our desktop. Despite what I thought at first, so my grandparents had a Windows 98 computer that they gave to me, and I used it for a while. I think it was my main computer when I was like 11 to 13 years old. Despite what I thought at first, you can actually change the wallpaper with an image. However, I'm leaving it the default for now. It's got a very updated file manager. I'm going to show y'all if I can get to it. There we go. I love that Windows 98's big addition to the Windows set of features on top of Windows 95 was that they wanted to make it very webby. So they threw HTML into every part of the operating system they possibly could. I'm pretty sure that this was a way to justify bundling Internet Explorer in with Windows 98 because there was a lawsuit coming at them from Netscape saying that this was a monopolistic practice. With that said, it does give it a very unique aesthetic. I remember one of my very favorite things to do back in the day was to go through the Windows directory and just kind of see what there was. I will admit, something that I really appreciate about Windows is that they were very open with every element of the operating system. Unlike Mac OS or even, especially modern Windows these days, they really just let you see the whole system. Could you change elements of the system? Probably not. I didn't know what I was doing. Most of these are binaries. There's no editing those. But I could play around, and I could guess what each of these things was. I was thinking like, ooh, is there a version of MS-DOS built into my computer that I wasn't aware of? I think my favorite part was the fact that there are a lot of little applications you could click on that would get fun stuff to happen. I'm gonna take this real quick. Y'all like that music, by the way? Ah, man, good stuff. This is really bringing me back. Let me see if there's anything else. Like I said, I'm cool with just kind of playing around a little bit and seeing what there is. Hopefully this gives y'all a sense of nostalgia for having done something similar. Now, I don't know what programs all of y'all ran on your Windows 98 machines back in the day, but what I will say is that I understand that there were a lot of different programs that people feel very nostalgic for, and unfortunately I don't have them. I have some, but I don't have all of them. This is really more just going to be about Windows itself. So I'm going to show you some of the default programs that come with it, but we're not going to play around too much with common programs that people would install on their systems. Although I will say, personally for me, The big games that I loved enjoying on Windows 98 were The Neverhood by Doug TeNapel. I was also a huge fan of Myst. I remember my brother and we used to play pretend Myst as kids. Like, we would pretend that different books around the house were linking books, and it was a lot of fun. I remember we used to make home movies as well, where my brother would play Atreus, and then, you know, we would try to like retell the story of Myst. It was a lot of fun. I think another game that I was really a fan of was Chicken Invaders. I had a copy of that on my machine. I also had a copy of Charlie the Duck. I don't know if any of you all know anything about that. It's a very basic platformer. The original version didn't come with any music. For a long time, I thought I had dreamed it. I didn't think it was real. I'm trying to think if there's anything else that was big back in the day that I enjoyed playing. Hamster Ball. There we go. I was a big fan of Hamster Ball. It's a clone of Marble Madness, I believe, that was made by Yahoo. It was available for download on their site Yahooligans, which doesn't exist anymore. But I remember, even though it was just a demo, I was still very young when I discovered it, so the demo levels were very challenging for me. And I got a lot of fun out of that. Now, Microsoft Windows 95 came with Internet Explorer 6. Now, this is the same version that came packaged with, I believe it was OS 9.2 for Macintosh. So that computer actually has a copy of Internet Explorer 6 on it as well, although it has a very different aesthetic. Now let's see how this works on Internet Explorer. Ah, man, it actually works. That's great. Okay, so this is my website. It looks very dated on purpose. I sometimes use it to test and see how compatible old operating systems are. Obviously, this YouTube iframe is not going to work, and the flex boxes that I use to organize the site don't work either. However, it does appear that a lot of this is actually coming in pretty good on Internet Explorer 6. You can visit my blog there too. Never mind, you cannot visit the blog because the link goes to my encrypted site, so I'm sorry. Before we get rid of, or before we move on to a different version of Windows, let's open Windows Media Player. Let's not open Windows Media Player. So yes, I am skipping directly to Windows XP from here. I wanted to put Windows 2000 Advanced Server in here because that was my main operating system when I got my first tower desktop PC. My dad had taken an old server from work they were going to throw out, and he gave it to me to use as my first PC. And so from when I was 9 to about 11, that was what I used. And it was the computer I learned how to program on. My very first language was Blitz Basic. It's a dialect of Amiga Basic that I got from a CD at the library. The name of the book, I believe, was Game Development for Teens, and I've been a programmer ever since. The problem is that Windows 2000 just refused to build on this computer. I could not install it in either VirtualBox or VMware. But what's nice is that Windows 98 has basically the aesthetic of Windows 2000, while Windows XP has the functionality. So by skipping between these two operating systems, we're really covering most of what they have to offer. Windows XP. This was a lot of y'all's first real operating system. This is the one that a lot of people my age specifically feel the most nostalgia for. And I don't blame them for that. This really has sort of an aura to it that we haven't seen since, for better or for worse. This was a very controversial user interface style at the time. And believe it or not, if I remember correctly, the man who's responsible for the design of Windows XP went on to design Windows Phone, which is an extremely different aesthetic, but also very striking. Now let's take a look at Windows Media Player. Ah, man. I remember I really enjoyed this version of Windows Media Player because of the skins. It just had a very cool aesthetic, like an MP3 player almost. That was just kind of floating there on your desktop. I remember we had, let me see, there were a couple of extra skins you could get depending on what version you have. And you could download skins from the internet, in fact. But all of them have this very kitschy look to them that made it very fun to listen to music. I remember a big successor for some people for listening to music back in the day was the Zune software, which was available for XP. Obviously, I'm running it on this computer. Now, obviously, you'd probably only want this if you had a Zune player, but I remember this very distinctly being the competitor to iTunes, the direct competitor to iTunes back in the late, I think it was 2008, 2009 when the software really started. I'm going to skip this real quick. Coming into its own. It's got a very unique aesthetic, you see, that I believe is congruent with Windows XP. Man. Anyway, believe it or not, you can actually still find this software. I'm going to try to see if I can leave a link to it in the description. If I can't find it, then I won't leave a link there. But you can still use this for listening to local MP3s. I highly recommend it. The aesthetic is unmatched. Now let's go through Tor Windows XP.
Welcome to Windows XP from Microsoft, the new version of Windows that brings your PC to life. Experience the best. Experience Windows XP. Best for business. Windows XP Professional shines as a business operating system. To begin the tour, click any selection.
I love how this software sort of advertises Windows XP to you after you've already bought the software. I think that this was very unique for its time because, like
With
I
Windows
said,
XP, you get the proven dependability of Microsoft Windows 2000, enhanced for high-speed performance and even greater reliability.
Okay. Anyway, so I love the idea of it trying to get you excited about Windows XP so that you would potentially tell your friends, hey, you need to upgrade to this version of the software. I haven't really seen anything like that since perhaps the Windows 7 advertisements that were on television back in like 2010, 2011. Once I think Microsoft kind of knows that you are ending up with Windows 11, you don't choose to get it, and so they don't really care. Unfortunately, Windows 10 was kind of the same thing. In fact, I believe that was partially responsible for why so many people did not like Windows 10 when it first came out. Yeah, the whole forced upgrade thing was not seen as a benevolent move by Microsoft. And in fact, in at least one incident, upgrading to Windows 10 actually caused a business to lose a lot of money, and Microsoft got sued and they had to pay out. But Windows XP is still seen as a lot of people's favorite version of Windows. I was never on Windows Messenger, but I know that it was, a lot of people are very fond. I have a lot of fond memories of Windows Messenger. Let's see what else we got to kind of play around with. This is the version that had a lot of the extra games. I'm going to be honest with you. This version of Solitaire in particular is still the only version I enjoy playing. I go out of my way to download Windows XP Solitaire from the Internet Archive to play on my computer. Even if I'm running Linux, I'll run it through Wine, which is the Windows translation layer. I am really, really fond of this version. It's very, very simple. It comes up instantly. It doesn't have any bells and whistles, and the aesthetic is absolutely perfect. Then we got Pinball. Obviously, this was a huge... I mean, every kid on the planet loved this game. And when it didn't come to Windows Vista, which was unfortunate, I'm glad Windows Vista had a lot of the stuff that it came with, but it was a big disappointment it didn't have 3D Space Cadet. And there are reasons behind that. The big one being the 64-bit conversion. It was very difficult to write a 64-bit version of this that actually worked. Recently, I believe they have made a 64-bit version of Space Cadet Pinball you can actually download. If that's true, you can look that up, or I'll include a link in the description. Why not? Why not? Now, Windows Movie Maker was first introduced in Windows ME. However, this is the version of Windows Movie Maker that I'm the most familiar with. I have a lot of home movies that I made with this, and even like looking at it is kind of bringing me back. And honestly, if it wasn't for this editing software, I don't think I would have been the video maker that I am today. It really inspired me to pursue filmmaking. Because as a kid, if you are told yes to something, even if it's in sort of a small, silly way, sometimes that ends up developing into a passion that can become a career someday. So, for what it's worth, thank you for bundling that in, Microsoft. That was a lot of fun. Got a updated version of Paint with, I don't know if it has any extra features compared to the other ones. I'm pretty sure this little curly line thing, I never figured out how this worked, by the way. This was new. But it's kind of fun, I'm just going to leave that where it is. I remember it was very cool back in the day to be able to, if I needed to find the exact color code for images back in the day, what I would do is I would just go here. I would open a sample picture maybe. No. Then I would eyedropper tool. Okay. Colors, edit colors. And there we go. Now I got the hex code and I got the color code. It's just kind of fun, It wasn't anything that I really needed at the time, but it was kind of fun. If I haven't made it overwhelmingly obvious, this was an operating system where if you did not have any programs installed, a child could spend an entire day playing with it. Now, I strongly believe that that has led to the computer literacy of my generation. We wanted to use the computer. It was fun to mess around with the computer. And they didn't hold anything back. We were using the same tools that anybody else would. And so it gave us a deep appreciation for how file systems work. So is the solution to computer literacy simply giving children of today Windows XP laptops? Perhaps. Windows Vista. Oh, much maligned Windows Vista. I have always had a soft spot for this operating system, despite the fact that it got a lot of hate from people. And I think that that's just because it was a lot more refined and polished. You have to admit that there's a certain elegance to Windows Vista that if you weren't familiar with Windows 7, which was definitely a refinement of Windows Vista, you would have at least been able to look at and say, yeah, that's more professional than XP. I actually enjoyed the widgets on the side. It definitely made it feel like Windows was moving somewhere, and it was in a positive direction without taking away from where the buttons were. The start menu is still here. It still looks the same as the Windows XP start menu, except for the fact that now there's vertical scrolling, which makes infinitely more sense, as well as a good text search here. I don't remember ever using this feature, but it was kind of cool to have a task switcher right there on the taskbar, The file manager was much more advanced. There were a lot of tools you could use that Windows XP did not have that made it very easy to organize your computer's files. I will say that. But I think the most important part of Windows Vista would be the games. My personal favorite was Inkball. I really, really, really liked this game. I loved how, clearly this was designed to be a tablet-controlled kind of game, because Windows was still kind of flirting with the idea of tablet controls. But, to my 9-year-old self, this very, very basic physics-based game was kind of challenging at some of the later levels, and it was very graphically stimulating, I'll say that. But obviously the one that everyone seems to have the most fun with is Purple Place. Now, I can't play that on this machine. Well, I say that. What's kind of funny? I've never played Purple Place before. This is my first time to play Purple Place. Y'all are watching me play it for the very first time. What is that thing? Oh. Okay. So do I just it's like a matching game, or what is this? Okay, well these little dudes are freaking me out, so I'm gonna go back. Yes, I want to return. Also, I love the Comic Sans title up here. A barely designed title. Okay, so the goal is for me to build a cake. Okay. I'll admit the design is very mid 2000s in honestly kind of a bad way. Take it back. Okay, so that does that, and then that. Okay. I see what we're doing here. Although the character design is horrendous. I have no idea what this thing is. Purple, I guess. I have nightmares about him tonight. Yes, let's return to the main menu. Okay, beginner. So we got a bunch of like wacky sound effects that belong in like a 90s Magic School Bus game. Is this like a character creator? Oh, am I supposed to make a particular guy? Oh, is it a guessing game? Okay, I see. Yeah, I don't want to play that. That looks stupid. That was kind of fun. Like I've said, I've literally never played that game before. But I know it was really special to a lot of people. Now, this is the version of Solitaire where a lot of stuff got changed. And even though I prefer Windows XP Solitaire, I still have a soft spot for this version. I think because I like the sound effects a lot. They're very tactile. I also like the kind of glossy look they gave to the cards. It was very visually stimulating. We got very like graphically interesting cards. The Hearts deck was my favorite. I loved. I mean, I'm sure some graphic designer got paid a lot for this. Man, something I haven't gone into very much yet is the fact that Windows, for some ungodly reason, tended to lead the aesthetic of the time period in which it was released. Not all the time, but sometimes. And part of that might have been a reaction to the existing zeitgeist. But you can definitely you can get a feeling for what culture was like at the time based on what the version of Windows looks like at that time. It was very... There's this weird sort of like combination between refined and whimsical. I think the 90s was trying to grow up, but it wasn't really quite sure how. Ah, yes. Okay. Windows Media Center. I actually used this program, believe it or not. I thought the aesthetic made the music I listened to a lot more interesting. I want to say yes. Why not? You know what? Just actually cancel. I also miss when Windows came with a bunch of songs built in. Kind of let you test out what your system would have sounded like without you having to directly add anything to it. Yeah, go away. DVD Maker was a lot of fun. I loved them bundling in programs that they thought would be the future. You know, like, oh, well, a lot of people are getting DVD rewritable drives. We're going to include a DVD Maker so that you'll want to upgrade to Windows Vista so that, hey, you can make DVDs in this version. It was a very, I'm not going to say forward thinking because DVDs were on their way out by about maybe 2010. But it was definitely considerate. That's what I like about it. They wanted you to be able to use your PC out of the box and be excited for the new version of Windows. So yeah, Windows Vista was my main operating system from when I was maybe 13 to when I was probably about 15 years old. I wasn't on Windows 7 very much, even though I do have a very soft spot for Windows 7 because I've used it off and on for years. But my main computer was Windows Vista for like 2-3 years. And in fact, I wrote some of my earliest novels on a copy of Office 2006 that I had running on Windows Vista. And so, yeah, very, very strong feelings about it. Now, I don't know if I'm cheating with this, but this isn't technically Windows 7. This is actually Windows Server 2008. But it's essentially Windows 7 as long as you install the media package. The only thing that it doesn't come with, which really disappoints me, is Kalimba. by Mr. Scruff on his album Ninja Tuna, which everyone that I know with Windows 7 PCs growing up, that was like their favorite song. That was their jam. Because it really is a good song. Mr. Scruff is a good artist. And it came bundled with every copy of Windows 7. And so everybody listened to it. Now, what I think is kind of funny is that the version of Windows Media Player, or Windows Media Player Legacy, that's on Windows 11 today is the exact same version of Windows Media Player that came bundled in with Windows 7. And since I don't have Spotify anymore, I listen to everything exclusively through MP3. I actually use Windows Media Player, this exact version of Windows Media Player, as my media solution. And I'm very fond of it. It works pretty well. It's a little glitchy, but, you know, that's life. Now, I always used Windows 7 with this sort of extended taskbar thing because I liked being able to see the full names of all the windows. And I'm kind of shocked that this whole quick launch taskbar thing wasn't released in versions of Windows sooner. It's a great idea. I've never liked the idea of the quick launch and the window title bars being separated because it wastes space, honestly. I like being able to click on them and then be able to access them later in the same sort of vicinity. However, when I upgraded to 7, I didn't notice this right away. This was something it took me a little while to notice. Now, this version comes with, I think it's Internet Explorer 9. Let me see real quick if we can find what version of Internet Explorer this is. I mean, unless it doesn't tell us. I'm not really quite sure how we even get there. Internet Explorer 8. Ah, okay. What does my website look like in Internet Explorer 8? No flex. There's no Flexbox. It looks like. Oh, what we got over there? The YouTube iframe is at least trying. It's not working, but it's trying. HTTPS doesn't work on Windows 7 unless you have an updated browser, just because a lot of the encryption algorithms built into the operating system are already deprecated, unfortunately. But, I mean, it kind of works. I don't know why you'd ever want to use Internet Explorer 8 for anything these days, but, I mean, you could probably Google something with it. Now, like I said, this is the server version, so this isn't necessarily as up-to-date, or doesn't have as much software as proper Windows 7 might. But we do have a lot of conventional Windows 7 applications, like the updated WordPad with the ribbon interface. I was always a big fan of this because it kind of made, for some use cases, Microsoft Word obsolete. I still used Office. I had Office. But if I was using a computer without Office, I'd typically be fine with WordPad. Because, I mean, it gives you a lot of options here. And what's nice is that you can actually open and save DocX documents to a limited extent. So they really wanted to give you kind of like a mini Microsoft Word experience with this particular version of the software. It's very, very considerate. Let's see if there's anything else on this that I would like to show you. Yeah, not really. Windows 7 is Windows 7. All of y'all remember it pretty well. So let's just let's move away from Windows 7 towards a more controversial version of Windows. So when I upgraded my computer from Windows Vista to Windows 7, the next version that I picked up was Windows 8.1. I used Windows 8 at school in my Photoshop class, and frankly enough, I wanted nothing to do with it. I wasn't fond of the fact that they were changing my beloved Windows, or that they removed the arrow theme. I thought that was so cool. I loved the glassy effect. But I actually came to love Windows 8.1. Admittedly, I'm a big fan of the Charms bar. I kind of was a little upset when they took that away, just because I like the idea of flicking my mouse and then being able to search. Now, obviously, there are other ways to do that, and I use those other ways, but I thought it was very intuitive. And like has been well established prior, I was a huge Windows Phone fan. And you know what? I still am, in some ways. And so I kind of appreciated Microsoft's attempt to make it more like Windows Phone, even if it was very misguided. I'm really curious to see if my site loads. Also, I'll admit, I thought it was kind of cool to use desktop, I'm going to say like tablet looking sites on a desktop PC. It was very, it was fun. Was it useful? No, it was not. But it was kind of fun. It was gimmicky, I'll say that. I see that the Flexbox is working fine in Internet Explorer 10. There's a couple of areas where it's broken. The little icon here doesn't want to follow my mouse cursor, but the YouTube link seems to work just fine. Now, what's nice about 8.1 is that you could go up here and you could either downsize or X out your thing. I'm going to see if I can... I guess I don't have any other windows open. I can't do that. Let's go back to my desktop. Unfortunately, it looks like the Windows Store doesn't work anymore, which makes me very sad. There's a lot of cool stuff on there. But I've tried to keep this version as stock as I possibly can. So we should be able to take a look at some other applications. Now, unfortunately, just because it's kind of hard to get my hands on copies of these operating systems, I'm using Windows 8.1 embedded, which doesn't include the music app, which is very sad. But I didn't really use it very often either in this time period. I used the Zune application almost exclusively. With that said, you can see the very first version of the modern settings menu, which has significantly less than the actual like nowadays modern settings menu has. But they were definitely committed to the aesthetic. This doesn't make any sense on a desktop PC, and I'm glad they put a little control panel button down here to really emphasize how different these paradigms were. But oh man, I remember seeing this operating system on my grandparents' Surface Pro 3. If y'all don't remember, Surface Pro 3 had an incredible Christmas advertisement that I memorized and used to sing all of the time. Well, the whole thing made me want a Windows tablet really bad. I begged my parents for the longest time, and obviously I never got one. I had to be an adult. And I'm now recording this on a Surface Pro 9, so I guess it's come full circle. But no, I remember playing Game Dev Tycoon a lot on my grandparents' Surface at the time. And I remember going through the Windows Store, which had nothing in it, looking for fun, obscure apps to download on there. And it was a good time. It was a good time. I'll commend Microsoft for trying something different, even if it was a really bad idea. And now for the real meat and potatoes. This is, and I'm not exactly remembering what version this is. I'm going to pull up the settings menu, and we're going to take a look real quick. Yeah, I forgot exactly what version this is. I'm trying to see if I can find out where it is. But this is one of the earliest versions of Windows 10. And it's hard to remember exactly what Windows 10 was like back in the day, just because there are a lot of computers today running Windows 10, but the Windows 10 of today is not the same thing. If you remember correctly, there used to be versions of Windows that came out every 4 years with a completely different version number, and this was released 10 years ago. The different versions that have been released have pretty significant UI changes. For example, this bar here at the bottom doesn't look anything like that anymore. This still comes with the version of Microsoft Edge that used a completely different rendering engine. There is nothing in common between what we now know as Microsoft Edge and what this software is. I remember actually back in the day, because I was a Windows insider, I even had a Ninja Cat sticker. I remember when this was called Project Spartan, and that was the coolest thing on the planet. I really wish they had kept that name. I even think that it might have been a lot more popular if they had kept that name. I see the cursor seems to be working. What's interesting is I leave this little area here and it kind of stops working, but I don't know. Nothing ever came of this rendering engine. This rendering engine just died. Just kind of sad. But regardless, let's take a look at the start menu. Now you'll notice one of the first things that is different from the start menu of today is that the tiles are colored. Now I really wish I could recreate this look in modern Windows 10 because I was very fond of it. Not only was it very Windows Phone-like, but it kind of popped, It made the live tiles feel that much more alive, and I was very fond of it. Let's see if the store works. It's probably not going to work. I haven't tried this yet. You know, me too, Windows, me too. Yeah, that's unfortunate. You notice how the settings menu is a little bit different. The idea behind this is that Windows Phone and Windows 10 for desktop have the same interface. And so a lot of these apps, when you take them and you minimize them, they look like the Windows Phone equivalent. And I mean, the later versions kind of look like this, but not really. Ultimately, when it comes down to it, Microsoft decided they wanted to launch a new app paradigm at the wrong time. That was something that you would have wanted to launch back in maybe 2006 at the latest, when you were moving to 64-bit as the default processor architecture. That was not something you wanted to do in 2015 when everything was going to the web. It was just a big... Well, no one wanted to develop for this platform, and so nobody did. You see the music app is here, and it looks a lot different today. I wonder if we're going to see any... We saw Deadmau5 earlier. I wonder if they're going to have... There's Tegan and Sarah. I wonder if we're going to have any other artists that are kind of dated appear on this menu. Man, I can't tell you how nostalgic this makes me. You got the black keys. That's fun. That's fun. That's fun. Let's see if we got any other fun applications. Let's go to all apps here. A lot of people don't know this, but you can actually click on the letters and it will take you to this little menu where you can just kind of shortcut. What if the Xbox app works? If it doesn't, that will be disappointing. I know they changed that app quite a bit. We got Cortana. Nobody misses Cortana, which makes me sad. Cortana had a lot of potential. I was really looking forward to it back in the day because it was useful on Windows Phone. It was just completely useless on desktop. Now, one little design element that I was super critical of back in the day, and I'm kind of glad it's died, is Windows 10 had so many hamburger menus. I think the idea was that they thought this was the most natural way to get the interface to look the same across all different types of devices. But it's just, hamburger buttons are just bad design. Now, obviously the File Explorer doesn't look a whole lot different. They really didn't make a lot of changes there. And maybe I'm sort of overhyping all the changes they made. Unfortunately, some of these apps I can't even load right now. So you really can't see how different they were. But Windows 10 today has been, I'm going to say, sort of bitten with the cynicism of Windows 11. There are a lot of Windows 11 styled apps that they've sort of backported to Windows 10. So, you know, like the store and whatever, they still work. And they're trying to sort of backport the aesthetic as well, which is really incongruent. They want the very natural Android Chrome OS looking Windows 11 applications to run on Windows 10 and be the defaults. And oftentimes the people who are using these devices don't really have a say. And I guess they don't really care. But what it does do is it takes the very careful, curated interface of Windows 10 and make it look out of date. So what comes after that? This is it. This is not a virtual machine. This is my actual computer. I'm running Windows 11 right now. Now I'm using Explorer Patcher to make the interface here in the taskbar look like Windows 10, but I unfortunately have the Windows 11 Start menu. I know I'm a heretic. I like to put my taskbar at the top of the screen. I've always thought that this design looked very, very Chrome OS-like, you know? There's a strong emphasis on stylized icons, but not stylized applications, which seems a little bit backwards to me. Like, yeah, make the icons look interesting, give them a very unique visual flair, but I would also like to see a little bit of life in the apps themselves. I don't want apps to feel like they're just sort of an invisible gateway to the end result of whatever you're trying to do. I like it when apps exist as a sort of, you know, you have fun on the way. They elevate the end product. Maybe that's a little bit too non-specific, but I'm going to go back and I'm going to explain to you what I mean. I remember I had a laptop. It was one of my very first computers. I think I was probably 8 or 9. It was an old laptop. It was from '99. It was running Windows XP, and it was given to me to play around with. And it had a copy of Office 97 on it. And the version of Publisher that came with that machine had the option to print off, you could print off paper airplane templates. So I could make a fun paper airplane design and I could print it off. I remember in the wizard for setting this up, one of the options it asked you was, would you like to put an FM radio in your paper airplane? And I thought that was hilarious at the time. There was a lot of this back in the day. There were a lot of Easter eggs built into Windows that if you knew what to look for, you could find and have some fun with. I think one of the most famous ones is the Microsoft Excel, hallway of hell. I mean, imagine something like this shipping with modern Microsoft. You never see that. Obviously, I understand why they don't do this anymore. It's very important that you specify exactly what you're giving to customers. For security reasons and for other reasons as well. Though I will say, it's not fun anymore. I'm really, really glad that I could be involved with the Linux scene. Where there's a lot of interesting things going on. There's a lot of really strong personalities. Most people don't know it, but the guy who created X Screensaver for Linux owns a nightclub in San Francisco. With that said, my introduction to computers were as it was a very whimsical experience, I remember them being really fun sort of gateways into all these unique interactive experiences. And maybe that's just part of growing up, Computers are appliances in the same way smartphones are appliances. The iPhone 14 isn't meaningfully different from the iPhone 16 or whatever. We've got to the point where the new and exciting worlds are different. There are other things to be innovated, and computers have kind of reached the point where I would even go so far to say it feels like Windows 11 is doing plastic surgery on itself to seem relevant, because it's kind of past its prime a little bit. And I can imagine a future in which Windows isn't really used by anybody except for legacy purposes or for gaming. That said, I'm not really quite sure what I wanted to do with this video. I just thought it'd be really fun to walk all of y'all through this and share a piece of something that was very important to me growing up. Now, the moment that the software I need to be able to run on this machine runs on Linux, my animation software, some music production software as well. I know I can learn Blender, and I am learning Blender. It's not the same. It's not as conducive to my workflow. The moment these things will work on Linux, that's the moment where I don't think I'm ever looking back. I'm done with Windows. I can't stand it anymore. I can't stand the telemetry. I can't stand the slowdowns. I can't stand the necessity to upgrade my device when I really don't need to. I can't stand Microsoft anymore, And I was their biggest fan for the longest period of time. And now their products are boring and bland and not they're not built in such a way that sparks joy in the users. Maybe you all understand what I'm talking about, and if you do, I appreciate it. If it's not too much effort, leave some of your favorite experiences with Windows growing up in the comments below. I'd really love to see what these operating systems meant to you, either as growing up or as adults. And you never know. Maybe some of that magic will find its way into something new. And it'd be nice to be able to see, glimpses of it from the past so that we have a trajectory going forward with the Linux distribution that we will be building if you subscribe to this channel. With that said, thank you all very much for watching, and I hope to see all of y'all again very soon. Take care.